submitting. Oh. Admit all. Admit all. There we are.
Yeah.
Good morning, James, Bob, Greg, Alice, Michael, Mike, Peter. Nice to see you. Thanks very much to everyone for joining. There's more people coming in. Sorry, let me just admit more. If you've just joined, please, if you could mute just to cut out any background noise. Camille, Beth, if you could mute, please. Chris Giles, if you could mute, please, that'd be great. Just to cut out any background noise. Thank you very much. Morning, Barry. Morning, Chris. Thanks for joining. Morning, Kim. Morning, Philip. Morning, John. Lots of joiners. Hang on, a few more to join.
Well done,
Kim.
Lee, getting on the Teams call. Well done, sir.
Well, there we are. Excellent. Hi, Dennis. Good to see you. Thanks for joining, and I hope you sorted your IT issues out. Right, Kim, if you could mute, please, that would be great. Just to cut out any background noise. And Camille, if you could mute, please, that'd be great. Okay, perfect. Excellent. Okay, it's now 10:32. Welcome everybody to this week's Pension Playpen Coffee Morning. We're going to have the delights of Henry Tapper chairing the event and pushing through some key questions to Derek Benstead from First Actuarial. This is on the amazing new subject of CDC, which is a new old subject, but hey guys, it looks like it's coming. So I'll monitor the lobby, Henry. If you want to raise a hand and ask any questions at any time, please raise a hand and Henry or I will bring you in. First of all, also we are recording, so can we have a thumbs up for everybody that we're being recorded? Everybody's happy being recorded. The video will appear on Playpen this afternoon. Thanks, Anthony, for your hand raise there, and I'll monitor that. The only other thing is on the chat, I'll open the chat room up. If you like today's presentation, we've started a new independent donations page. So if you like to make a donation for today, please do. I'll put that in the chat and I'll put it at the beginning and at the end so you can decide when you want to make a donation. That'd be great. So without any further ado, I will pass on to Henry. Henry, over to you, and hope everybody enjoys the session.
Okay, I see there's one question already from Stuart Ireland. I'll come to you in a second, Stuart. My background with Derek is that Derek taught me most of what I know about CDC, which isn't very much, and he's got most of it stuck in his head. But when we get him out on occasions like this, it always improves our capacity to understand and get our heads around what is a very simple subject, which we've made very hard indeed. So that's all I've got to say about Derek, and I will hand over. But before I do, Stuart, do you want to unhook and just say what it is you want?
I was just raising a thumb up to say, good news, I'm happy to be recorded.
Okay, thank you very much, Stuart. Okay, excellent. Derek, off you go, old chap. Tell us what you want to say, and then we'll be throwing questions at you as you go along.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Henry. Delighted to have been invited to chat to you all this morning about CDC. You posed an excellent list of questions that you'd like to be addressed today. So what I'll do, I'll start for 5 or 10 minutes just describing what CDC is for the benefit of anyone on the call who might not be familiar, and describing some key legislative principles for CDC in the UK legislation, which together will set the scene for tackling all the great questions which you've posed. And
I think that would be really helpful for those of us who have to explain what CDC is to people who don't know. So if you can...
And then we can take the questions one by one. I'll make some comments on each question. Audience can pitch in either with the electronic hand or with a written question in the chat box, and we can take questions as we go along once we get to the work through the question stage. So let's start with what is a collective defined contribution pension scheme. So first of all, as the name says, it's defined contributions, particularly from the employer, if there is one contributing to the scheme. So broadly speaking, no risk to the employer, they're paying a fixed contribution. But the critical thing, and this is the collective word of the name, there are no individual investment accounts. So not a personal pension or an individual DC scheme as you are used to it, but there's just one investment pool out of which pensions are paid and income for life as can be afforded from the assets and the contributions. The size of the pensions are determined by an actuarial valuation. So in defined benefit world, we're well used to the idea of having a defined set of benefits, doing a valuation and saying what the contributions must be to pay for them. In collective DC world, we do all the same math, but reverse the question. Given a set of assets and contributions, what benefits can we afford to pay out of those assets and contributions? So actuarially, the maths is familiar. We just change the question that we're asking. The benefit structure of a CDC scheme might look like a career average scheme. Not necessarily, but that's the easiest way to think about it in the first instance. So imagine you've got some career average benefits, but those benefits are not guaranteed. There's an annual increase applied every year in light of actuarial valuation result. It's usually an increase, but in some years, in bad times, there might be a decrease. As I said, the pensions are not guaranteed. They might go down as well as up. And we can communicate benefits every year to set benefit expectations and to modify those benefit expectations as we go along through the annual increase or decrease mechanism to maintain that equation between the assets and the value of the benefit expectations, that every year we do evaluation and adjust the annual rate of increase or sometimes decrease to maintain that value, that the benefits we expect to pay are equal in value to the value of the assets. So that's the outline of what CDC is and the very basics of how it works. There are a number of legislative principles governing CDC in the UK, which are important for the purposes of making sure that we can trust CDC and that members get a fair result out of it. So the first principle is that all members, whether they are retired or not retired, get the same annual increase or decrease to their pension. Everybody is in it together. What we don't do is prioritise pensioners over non-pensioners, for example. And also what we don't do is have some corridor system of within which small changes are ignored and you try to keep everything the same until a big change is forced. We maintain that equation of a balance every year. The discount rate in the actuarial valuation is a best estimate rate of return on the investments. So working in best estimates is important because it seeks to be intergenerationally fair. Actuaries love to be prudent. We love to set discount rates that are lower than the return that we expect on the assets. But if we did that in a CDC scheme, the consequence would be, while the scheme is growing, while it's new and collecting members and collecting benefit accrual faster than it's paying out pensions, prudence would mean withholding money from members' pensions because we're hiding some of it in our prudent margin. So we don't seek to be prudent, we seek to operate in best estimate terms. So what that means in financial language is the discount rate should represent the internal rate of return on the assets. That is the rate of return that discounts the income expected from the assets and obtains their market value is the answer to that discounting process. So if you're discounting
I put my hand up and this is
Yes,
an
Henry.
exemplar to other people to do so. But I was actually quite surprised when you said that there will be no smoothing, because I can't see how you can avoid substantial changes in payments to those receiving pensions if you're paying 100% out every year. If a market goes down 20%, as it might do this year in a Trump tariff world, how does that not result in a 20% fall in pensions, Derek?
Very good question, Henry. And it goes to the heart of my use of the word smoothing, and other people might use the word smoothing differently. So I was careful to say smoothing in the sense of withholding money in good times and overspending in bad times, i.e. having an actuarial plan that actually doesn't balance the value of benefits to the assets. Nevertheless, the outcome of CDC is quite smooth, because if the principle is that we change the annual rate of increase to change the value of benefits to match them to the value of the assets, then the average time of payment of benefits in a mature scheme that's been open for a while might be about 25 years. So if after a year the comparison of assets to the value of benefits has changed by 25% because there's been a marked market movement, then a change of the annual increase rate of 1% per annum over the lifetime of members is sufficient to affect the value of benefits on average by 25% and to restore that equation of benefit payments with the value of assets. So the outcome is indeed quite smooth, but it's smooth because of the premise of managing the scheme annually, gradually as we go, by adjustment of the annual increase rate, as opposed to achieving smoothing by ignoring a surplus or ignoring a deficit. So I approve of the former, but not the latter.
Thank you, and that explains it to me. I don't see any hands up elsewhere, so I'm assuming so far it explains it to others.
We've got a hand from Peter, so shall we have Peter?
Oh, sorry, I missed that. Peter.
Yes, I just wondered, picking up on that last point, you said you used the internal rate of return as the return. Yeah. In Henry's example about swings in equity value, does not the internal rate of return itself smooth it so that, for example, if shares go up, the dividend yield goes down, and if you're using the dividend yield to calculate the internal rate of return, are you not actually smoothing that way?
Yes. So that actuarial method does indeed provide a smoother result, because by using internal rate of return, we are relating the discount rate to the state of all the asset markets that the scheme invests in. And as you point out, Peter, if the equity market goes up, dividend yield goes down, discount rate goes down, the value placed on the liabilities goes up, and there's some semblance of balance that naturally comes out of the actuarial method. So again, it's employment of a method that results in a smoother outcome compared to what we're used to in too many defined benefit schemes, where a gilt yield-driven discount rate doesn't bear much relation to the state of the investment markets other than gilts.
Okay, so we have another question from Chris, assuming, Peter, you feel comfortable. So before I do, just ask you that question.
Yes, I do.
Okay, Chris, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks, Henry. So just to understand it, so the member's benefit is always expressed as a level of income, is it, rather
Yes.
than as a, so that would make sense in terms of Henry's point about the smoothing, because you see the volatility in your income level changing, which is obviously going to be paid across a lifetime rather than in a value of pot. Okay, that
exactly.
makes perfect sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Good.
Good. Gareth Morgan.
Hi. Yeah, following up on that point, the big advantage since pension freedoms of DC schemes for people who are on with low levels of pension savings and dependent on means tested benefits is that they can, instead of taking regular income, which is taken a penny for penny off their means tested benefits, they can take a kind of drawdown, which has a much more generous treatment of capital values. There's going therefore to be, for people who are in that situation, put into a CDC scheme, a real potential penalty, is there not?
I'll take your word for it, Gareth, because you're the nation's expert on the interaction of low pension incomes with the state benefit system. So I'll accept your comment as you made it. Yeah, I mean, I would wish to see the widespread provision of pensions across the private sector. That would include rather better pension incomes for many to get them out of some of these state benefit traps. I certainly don't advocate pension to the exclusion of cash. I think both go together. So I mean, this isn't the point that you made, but in the world of DC, you do get enthusiasts for DC for whom control of their own pot is everything. They don't want to share anything with other people. So providing pensions through a collective solution doesn't match everybody's attitudes. I would just return to there's scope for providing pension, but also scope providing cash, whether by commutation or by a DC pot in addition, for people to have flexibility for cash sums as well. None of those remarks address your point, Gareth, but I just accept your point as a fair point.
Let's move on. Oh, we've got two more questions. Okay, I'm going to put a bar after this, and we're going to move on for poor Derek's sake. But Bobby Ridaway, actuary question. What have you got to say for yourself, sir?
Thanks, Derek. So I assume if you've got CDC in accumulation, you get to retirement, then you'd have access to a transfer value to take to another approach. And would that transfer value generally be the same as it would if it was in the DC scheme, i.e. the value of your share of the assets?
Well, I'm going to say no is the short answer relative to your phrase, same as a DC scheme. So a DC scheme has an individual investment account, and no collective DC does not operate with individual investment accounts. What it does do is equate the value of benefit expectations to the value of the assets. So every member has access to a transfer value calculated in a somewhat similar manner to a defined benefit scheme. It's the value of their benefit expectations, and everybody's transfer value altogether adds up to the value of the assets. So that approach to transfer values may end up with a transfer value that's higher or lower than what an individual pot would have been given the same contribution.
Yeah, okay. But the important point is it's 100%. They add up to 100%. There's no penalty.
Yes. So members have access to their share of the fund in proportion to their benefit liability.
Right. Okay. So no, we're going to have no DC underpin to this arrangement. It's going to be done on an actuarial basis in the world of Derek Benstead. Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Dennis Leach, never heard you on this before.
Hello. Hello. Sorry, I just so that I understand. I'm slightly puzzled by the role of discounting because you're talking. As I understand, the discount rate is based on the expected return on the expected rate of return on the assets, best estimate discount rate, rather than gilt yield. And you talk about the expected payments, expected benefit payments. And I'm curious as to, I mean, since they're not defined by the scheme rules, the expected benefit payments are presumably based on the performance of the assets. Is it not circular? I mean, isn't the discount rate used to forecast the benefits? So is there not a circularity in using the same best estimate discount rate, both to forecast the returns and to discount them?
Yeah, so the scheme will issue members with a benefit statement every year. That benefit statement sets the members' expectations for the pension they can expect, but those expectations are not literal guarantees. Yes, the scheme will follow those expectations in making benefit payments, but the communicated benefit is not a guarantee in the sense that it can't go down, but it is. I'm trying not to overstate the case. Let's call it an obligation. So long as you don't translate obligation to mean guarantee, what you're communicating to the members is your obligation, because you are setting a pattern of expectations to the member as to what you're going to pay them when they retire. So it isn't a guaranteed statement, but you are communicating what you're going to pay, so that members know what to expect. Therefore, you do have a set of benefits that the actuary can value and compare to the value of the assets. And you do have a set of benefits that you can then adjust annually, usually up, sometimes down, to keep the value of those benefits in line with the value of the assets.
Very good. Are you okay, Dennis?
Not really, sorry, but so how do you calculate the benefits?
Well, every
assets.
Yeah. So every year there will be a piece of benefit accrual, which I'll come to in a moment, how you might accrue it. But every year there's a piece of benefit accrual. The annual benefit statement can show last year's pension, the increase or decrease on last year's pension, the new accrual for this year, and add those three things up to get the new pension at the latest scheme year end. How might the pension accrue every year? I can think of three basic ways of doing it. There's Royal Mail CDC scheme has set the accrual rate of 1/80th of pay for each year of service, and the Royal Mail scheme is seeking to keep that 1/80th constant over time.
Okay.
Secondly, if you had many employers sharing one CDC scheme, and of course multi-employer CDC is on the horizon, then you might continue to have one accrual rate per employer, where all active members of that employer have the same accrual rate. So depending on the contribution rate coming from that employer, one employer might pay 20% for 60th, another one might pay 15% for 80th, for the sake of argument. But I think what you would do then is calculate the benefit accrual rate annually, so that each employer is paying a contribution that pays for benefit accrual for its staff that relate to the average age of those staff and relate to the contribution rate being paid. So the accrual and the contribution match each other, so there's no cross subsidy between employers. But otherwise, it still looks like a career average scheme, a flat accrual rate for all staff of one employer, change that accrual rate every year to keep the value of accrual in line with the contributions paid. Third method is to calculate benefit accrual for each individual member using actuarial factors which are age related. So take the contribution paid in respect of a member, whether their own contribution or the contribution of their employer, and use an actuarial commutation factor to convert the contribution into a CDC pension. So by doing that on an age-related basis, clearly those terms will get more expensive as the member gets older, and you would need to communicate with the members how that commutation rate is changing. So two basic ways of doing it: something that looks rather like career average, or something that looks a bit more like DC, take a contribution and use a individual factor to convert it into a pension to get that accrual for each year of service.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, I love 3. I don't like 1 and 2 so much, but you might guess that by my reactions. Let's move on to Brian, and then Barry, and then I'm having no more questions at this stage because Derek is not going to get through his work. Right, so Brian.
Thank you. Hi, Derek. Is the right to a transfer out still available once the pension is in payment? And if so, is it based on a scheme-wide longevity calculation or the individual's own health and mortality?
No, not available in retirement. Yeah, that's the short answer. I don't feel the need to amplify it. Just the same as it is in the defined benefit world.
No, thank you. Cheers.
Thanks very much. Dennis, can you put your hand down if you have any more questions? Thanks. Barry Mack.
Not unrelated to the previous question, Derek. You talked about all the individual transfer values would add up to 100% of the assets. So if you're 13 months away from normal retirement, so you have a right to a transfer and you're seriously ill, it would pay to take the transfer, and that would be selection against the fund. How do you deal with that?
We have the same question arises in defined benefit schemes, and in my long experience of being a scheme actuary to defined benefit schemes and preparing transfer values often for people approaching retirement where they've asked an IFA for some help, relatively few people transfer out at retirement. It does happen, obviously, but not to the extent that it upsets the funding of DB schemes, and I wouldn't expect it to happen to the extent that it would upset the funding of CDC either. So yes, it's anti-selection, but I don't foresee it happening to the extent that it creates a big actuarial problem.
Does that answer you, Barry?
Yes, thank you.
Now look, Quinlivan, you dirty dog, you're going to have to wait because I said no more. Barry was the last question on this round. You're going to get yours answered in a second. Derek.
Okay, so let's move on to the first question on the list that was announced in advance that I would address. So is CDC like with profits? So my personal experience of a with profit endowment policy that I took out in the years before I started actuarial training, and therefore in the years before I knew any better, I had an endowment policy over the period 1985 to 2008. By the time it matured, I got an average return on my contributions of 4% per annum, which I thought was really very poor. Being an actuary by then, I could work these things out. I rather suspect that my endowment provider spent too much money on maturities prior to mine, and there was less money left in the kitty by the time that my policy matured. And when, as a trained actuary, I tried to find out information about my endowment policy and how it was being managed, I could find very little that actually helped me. Yes, insurance companies are required to publish a with profits guide, which you can find online and read, but really it doesn't tell you anything that you might want to know about the investment performance on the with profits fund and who has got what amongst the policyholders as a consequence of the return that's been earned. So to come back to the S word, the smoothing word, to my mind, smoothing means ignoring the market to some extent and overpaying than relative to what the market can afford sometimes and underpaying in others. So I don't like that. I don't like that given my history in a with-profit policy. I've explained after the smoothing questions that CDC doesn't plan to pay out more in good times and less in bad times. So those principles of CDC do arise in large measure from my experience of with profits. So we do equate the value of benefits to the asset. We don't smooth in the sense of withholding money or overpaying money. And we have transparency to help people see that what is being done is fair. And while, of course, 99.99% of members won't be able to work out for themselves whether what is done is fair, if everything is public, academics, consultants, think tanks, critics have got the data to make that judgment for themselves and publicly make comment if they want to that we can all learn from. So while the comment is to see like with profits is often made, I would point at the distinctions where I'm trying to make it not like with profits rather than making it like with profits.
Thank you very much. We had a very interesting conversation about with profits with Bobby last week, which you can refer back to anyone on the Pension Paper website. But I thought that was a good addition to it. It made sense to me. Your second question, Derek.
We go on to the second one. So the next one along is expected take-up of CDC. So there are different potential forms of CDC, a scheme run by one employer, a scheme shared by many employers, conceivably a scheme that individuals join whether or not they have an employer, and in that latter case, do they join it while they're working or do they join it at retirement? So CDC regulation as it has been created rather assumes that CDC schemes are going to be operating in competition with each other and need to be regulated as if they're operating in competition with each other, with very detailed regulation of how they're run actuarially, how they're communicated with members, proof of admin systems, proof of IT systems to TPR and so forth. So we have a very burdensome regulatory system. I don't think we'll see many more single employer CDC schemes beyond Royal Mail, because if you're just one employer seeking to start a scheme and you look at the authorization process, which is designed for schemes which are in competition with each other, but you're just one employer wanting to operate a scheme for your own staff, not in competition with anybody else. It's over-regulated. Turning to multi-employer CDC, the premise of the regulation as drafted assumes the existence of a scheme proprietor who pays for the startup costs of the scheme and pays for the cost of winding up the scheme were the scheme ever to be closed down. So the proprietor is likely to be the investment manager, the person who's hoping to get assets under management from the CDC scheme, and to have some fee earning, profit earning function in the running of the scheme. What you're not likely to get is half a dozen unconnected employers starting a scheme between them just because they feel like it. Maybe half a dozen housing associations in the northeast of England grouped together to start a scheme. Don't really see that happening because they're not likely to want to create a scheme proprietor taking on some risk in the cost of the scheme as opposed to an asset manager taking on that risk. Having said that, we only need one CDC scheme that any employer can join, employers can start joining, and we're well away into reintroducing pensions into the private sector. Moving on to CDC that individuals can join, you could conceive of a national CDC scheme whether run by Nest or some other body, an insurance company perhaps, doesn't matter, where people can join as individuals. Don't need an employer. In principle, a self-employed person could pay some contribution to CDC scheme while they're working, convert that contribution each month into CDC pension using actuarial factors, and actually build up pension rather than pot while they're working. Alternatively, the CDC scheme that individuals can join could be at retirement only. Take an individual DC pot, transfer it in at retirement, convert it to CDC pension. So only once you get to the stage of individuals joining the schemes themselves as opposed to their employer does all the over-regulation of CDC have a material point of consumer protection, and only then does all that regulation have a point if there are two or more such schemes rather than just one nationally provided one. So I've gone off on a regulatory speech there without actually answering yet the question about CDC expected take-up. So let's revert to the question. Do I think there will be a lot of take-up of CDC? Given time, yes, I would expect to see a lot of take-up of CDC because, yes, cash in retirement is handy. It's handy for your medical bills. It's handy for care at the end of life. It's handy for exotic holidays or your metaphorical Lamborghini. But you also need reliable income for life. And the more that DB schemes run off, the more there will be a need in the private sector to be able to accrue pension rather than pot. So I do foresee substantial penetration into the private sector of CDC pensions, but I think it will take time because those individual employers who might have started a scheme for themselves are put off by the regulation. PPT have announced they wish to come to market with multi-employer CDC, and supposing TPT are first to market in 2027, I would fully expect to see a decent number of employers join that scheme early doors, and for after passage of time, as people see it working, as people review their existing DC schemes, compare it to CDC, and decide they like the idea of CDC compared to a DC, I expect to see a transition. It'll take time. The world turns slowly, but I think we will get there simply because people need pensions, and CDC is a way of providing pensions in the private sector that is much easier to manage than DB has been these last 20 or 30 years. So I think we will get there, but it's going to be 10 years to see even a modest number of people in CDC and 20 for it to properly take off.
Okay, I'm going to just stop you for a second and ask these questions. I can see John Quinlivan, like the man that he is, desperate to get in with his question, and we got Porrig in there. And the first time we had a question from Poppy, but it's gone away. So let's have John and Porrig for the moment. John first.
Good morning, Derek. And yes, well, a lot of credit to you guys for staying the course. You probably heard me say this before, but one of the greatest things that the calculations and modelling is present value. One of the weaknesses is present utility value. The shape of income needs in retirement, in particular post 75, is very different to the upsy downsy piece that where people are getting the same credit in pre-retirement and post-retirement, and to me that is ultimately a poor use of capital. And so I just question whether that legislation hasn't been thought through. The needs, because providing people with money when it's not needed is not an ideal pension scheme.
I think that is a fair comment, John. So I think objectively, any pension scheme should perhaps seek to provide less income for life than has traditionally been the case. I think cash in addition to pension is an easy and obvious answer to adapting to the shape of income needs. I do accept that a CDC scheme will often give higher rates of pension increase than a pensioner in late retirement might actually need. But it is that's a genuine criticism. I think it's a fair one. Yes, it's a potential misallocation of resources, but we need to make CDC work.
Understood.
And sometimes rates of increase will be higher than necessary simply because we need to spend the money on the members and the money's there and we've had some good times.
Yep,
and
okay.
I think the response is it is genuinely sensible to set expectations for income for life lower than we're used to and provide greater amounts of cash, perhaps by a DC pot in addition. I think your comment's fair.
Okay, I'm going to move on to Porrig now, if I may, John. Is that okay?
Perfect, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Derek, you used the example of TPT there as an example of private sector expanding to offer a model for the broader market. But TPT is not a typical provider. They've got a very different kind of historical client, even though they're trying to expand to become more like a normal life company. So can you really base your projections on that type of provider when they are quite different from the typical?
I think, yes, you're absolutely right. TPT are different from a typical provider if we regard the typical provider as perhaps being a master trust DC provider, the big insurance company names and other master trust names that set up during the auto enrollment period. TPT have a couple of advantages that help them come to market sooner rather than later. One, they're a defined benefit administration provider, and it's DB software that will be used to run CDC because the benefits are sufficiently similar to career average for that skill set and IT requirements to be what you need. And those skill sets don't necessarily exist in insurance companies and DC providers anymore. And of course, TPT is a investment manager. That's at the heart of what it does. So it's clearly seeking to get some assets under management. If you think of TPT's existing business, DB is in heavy decline. We all know that. TPT is a DC provider, not necessarily going to compete with the big insurers in the long run. What's the key important future for TPT? Well, it's CDC. It matches its skill set. So I'm very pleased to see TPT emerge as likely first mover in multi-employer CDC. I can't imagine many master trust DC providers are going to rush to start CDC and undermine their enormous investments in DC that they've put in down the years to cope with auto enrollment, to cope with DC flexibilities, to provide an online experience for members. They're bound to want to return on that investment. But it only needs one CDC provider that can take many employers for it to take off. And it may take a while for the second multi-employer provider to emerge. But
we'll see.
The need is there and people need pensions. And here's a possibility. So let's start. I said I think progress will be gradual and slower than enthusiasts like me might hope. But the need is there to be met. I think eventually it will be met.
I don't disagree. Sorry, Henry. I don't disagree. There's a need, but is there a demand?
Yeah, people need. Well, I mean, that's a very strange comment to suggest that people need pensions, but they don't demand them. I'm really not quite sure how those two things go together.
Because it's not going to be the individuals providing the scheme; it's going to be the employers, isn't it? So,
yes, but
is there demand in the market to create these multi-employer CDC schemes? I don't see there is at the moment.
Well,
there's a demand, yeah, because people need pensions and they'd love something better value. But are there really the numbers of employers ready to jump now? I just don't see it.
Well, amongst, again, reverting to TPT, TPT's client base includes many employers of rather more traditional paternalism than is common in the modern world, and therefore provides a good pool out of which there'll be a first set of employers moving to CDC. Fundamentally, we need to ask ourselves the questions: if you're an employer providing a DC scheme, would you consider CDC or not? So if any one employee that you're employing is receiving DC contributions over a career that might on average produce a £5,000 a year pension if the pot is spent on an annuity, then the actual range of outcomes for that person is very wide, depending on where equity and bond markets are when they retire. They might expect 5k from their contributions, but they might get 2.5k annuity, or they might get 10. And that huge uncertainty is impossible for individuals to manage. The same contribution history put into CDC might on average expect 6k rather than 5, because CDC can invest better in people's retirement than an annuity is invested. So you expect a little better, and the range of uncertainty is 5k to 7k, not 2.5 to 10. So if you're an employer reviewing your DC scheme and you observe there's a competing CDC product that on average gives your staff a little bit better pension and gives your staff a much greater reliability for that pension, it's an attractive proposition. It's the rational choice to make. So it'll take a while for the message to get out there to employers, but genuinely, it would make more sense to stick your 8% auto-enrollment minimum DC contribution into a CDC scheme than it would into DC.
Could I now move us on? Because I know you've probably got more questions, Porrick, but we've got 5 people that stacked up behind you. And I'm going to ask Chris to ask his question. Keep them brief and answers brief too, please, Derek.
Thanks, Henry. I've always been uncomfortable with the comparison between the 80-year-old widow who's at risk of a pension cut alongside a 45-year-old and a year's accrual. So coming back to John Quinlivan's point about increases not necessary for older people, is it possible to the 80-year-old forego any further increases but be guaranteed that their pension will stay level?
Short answer, no. CDC must avoid benefit guarantees, otherwise it becomes DB. And I think that principle of everybody in it together, even though it means at times a reduction in pension for pensions and payment, is an essential for the intergenerational fairness and to get the buy-in of the contributing generation to share with pensioners in the same scheme. The Dutch CDC system did protect pension increases for pensions and payment over non-pensioners. In the intergenerational solidarity has broken in the Netherlands. So I think it's better to stick to the all in it together principle for a better or worse, including the pensioners.
Thank you, Bobby. Okay. We have a question from you now.
Yeah, I'll leave my with profits comparisons aside because I wasn't from that. We haven't got time. So My question is, this country is just always ruled by what courts say. So, I mean, how trivial or not is the risk that 10 years down the line this is working? And I agree we need to get this working. And I think I understand a lot more of it now than I did at the start of this session, because I'd seen other versions of CDC, nothing like this. And I think, come to Padraig's point, I think as people understand how this works, the quasi DB part of it, then I think it will gain traction. But I also think that the quasi DB part of it, and you mentioned the word obligation, I can see a case in 15 years' time. We've had a bear market and someone complains about this and the courts rule that it's actually a defined benefit. I mean, how big do you think that risk is?
Well, that's an exceptionally good question, and one that exercised Royal Mail while they were dealing with DWP in the drafting of the regulations and legislation for CDC. So the legislative approach has been to put CDC in the same part of legislation in the UK as DC. So in UK legislation, we basically have money purchase and not money purchase. Anything that isn't defined as money purchase gets treated as defined benefit because it's not money purchase. So collective DC is put in the same legal box as money purchase, so that legally it cannot have created at a later date a defined benefit, because it isn't in that legal box, it's in the money purchase box. To be absolutely sure, the Royal Mail scheme has a clause in it that if, notwithstanding the legal setup in the UK, there were ever to be a defined benefit in the Royal Mail CDC scheme, it is disaggregated and wound up by dividing the scheme into individual DC pots. Now that would obviously be unsatisfactory, but you know, Royal Mail very keen that there should not be any risk of a defined benefit, and those are the two legal responses. One, the setup in law is such that it shouldn't be possible to make a defined benefit, and two, even if it was invented in law to create a defined benefit, the scheme disaggregates into DC pots.
I think that second one is brilliant. That second one's brilliant. You should get into all the CDCs.
Thank you. I would urge you to look in the chat box. There's a comment there from Julian Barker of DWP, the importance of no guarantees, and some good points raised by Andrew Young, who's someone we've known for a long time, has been involved in this. So please do have a look as we go through. But I'm going to move on now to Chris Bunford, then Peter, and then Mr. Bromwich.
Thanks, Henry. Thanks, Derek. And lovely to see so many people on talking about CDCs. When people sort of talk about negatively about CDCs, they generally say one of three things. One about the with profits comparison, which you've dealt with, Derek. One they say about, oh, it hasn't necessarily worked in Holland, but that's been dealt with by removing all the guarantees, hasn't it? That's kind of like generally the way, and all the investment freedoms. So if anyone's sort of worrying about that, I think that's kind of covered. And the other thing they say is, oh, but there are no guarantees. And those of us who love CDC go, yeah, there are no guarantees. It's really good. It works. Have you got any kind of way of expressing to people who have negative thoughts that how important, how good a thing that no guarantee thing is, Derek? Have you got any kind of stock answer to people?
Well, the great thing about no guarantees is the flexibility that gives you to invest for a good return. So in defined benefit world, the moment you see a benefit guarantee, scheme actuaries and trustees and the regulator rush to invest to match the guarantee, and that suppresses the expected return and makes the scheme more expensive and employs one of a screaming at the cost. So the fundamental premise of CDC is to make it possible to invest for a good return for the long term. What CDC needs is a pool of assets generating an income annually from those assets, whether it's dividend payments or rental payments or other kind of receipts, income generating assets held for the very long term. So you're paying pensions out of asset income and contribution income, and you're absolutely free to invest for a good reward wherever you can find it, and turning that into a member-friendly expression. Wherever a good return can be found, the members are going to share in it. So it's the I would point at the investment strategy. It's that the lack of guarantee frees up a positive investment strategy that generates better pensions.
I may not be able to get through all three. We are now past the hour by day. Is everyone comfortable? You can push off now. You're allowed to push off. Nobody seems to be. Right, Peter, very quickly from you, Peter Cameron Brown.
Yes, I was just going to pick up on the selling, if you like, of CDC to employers, which is going to be key to the initial take-up. I have experience with the not-for-profit sector. They are looking at their DC offerings and seeing from, say, the Corporate Advisor Survey that the returns from the scheme they've chosen can vary from annualized over the last 5 years, from 2.97% to 9.27% between the different providers, and they're very worried about that. So they are looking at alternatives, such as possibly reopening DB or CDC in that context. And indeed, after a preliminary skirmish, I'm introducing a group of about 12 such employers to TPT in June, as a sort of to explain the concept of CDC to them. So I just wanted to put that comment in.
I think they're great comments. Delighted to hear about your work, Peter, and the positive outcome from it.
Thank you. Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Peter. It is great. Mr. Bromwich, how are you?
Much. I'm an accountant, and one of the things that I get from the pension literature is how everybody rushed away from DB schemes because the deficits were put into the balance sheet. Am I right in saying that with CDC there won't be a deficit, or if there is, it'll run very shortly? Isn't that a great advantage if we want to encourage people back to more sensible arrangements?
Yes, so collective DC is DC for the employer, and drawing a DC scheme for the employer won't put a pension deficit on the employer's balance sheet. So agree with that.
That's a very big change, and I think one perhaps should make that more obvious.
Yeah.
What the other concern I have, if I may, is I know of the university system pension in Australia, and that says if things go wrong, everybody suffers, including pensioners, and taking their pensions. Is it really sensible to have a system whereby people in receipt of pensions, their pension's going to be variable? Because everybody sort of says, we want a wage for life sort of thing, a stable thing. And if pensions in payment go up and down, that could be a problem, couldn't it, in getting people to take on board that scheme if you were wanting to be a member?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could. One of the things we discussed amongst all the advisors involved in planning Royal Mail, so that's us, Willis Towers Watson and Aon, as we put our heads together with Royal Mail and Communication Workers Union. We actually thought it would be a good thing if in the first 10 years of the Royal Mail scheme, at some point pensions were cut, so that you established early doors that these are pensions that can go down as well as up, and that expectation is established while somebody is working, so that if it happens again while they're in retirement, they always knew that was a possibility. It's sort of part of the all being in it together. I mean, I do think the members' experience of being in the scheme and receiving a benefit statement annually that always changes the rate of annual increase, for better or worse, 1 year to the next, it's always going to change a bit. I would hope that gives members the correct impression that nothing in the scheme is guaranteed. It will change for better or worse, and they'll tolerate it were there to be a pension cut. I'll point my finger at DB World. As and when an employer becomes insolvent in a situation that results in benefits being cut to PPF levels, potentially a 10% benefit cut for the non-retired, administrators by and large do not get flooded with letters of complaint from members in that circumstance. I think the general public are more realistic about life throwing at you good times and bad times than the pensions industry is, and that a modest pension cut, I think people would be more realistic about. I mean, they certainly tolerate it if it's a 10% cut on joining the PPF. So,
that's beautiful. I'm going to come to the last question now. This is the last one. Aska, do you want to ask it if you're still there? Yes, you are. Hello, Aska.
We're not hearing anything, I'm afraid.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off. There is some really great stuff in chat, and I know that if Andrew Young wanted to ask the question, he would do, but you can check it out in chat. We've been at it now for some time. Thanks for your comments too from Dennis, Bobby, and from Julian Barker. There can't be a deficit in UK CDC schemes. It's very nice to hear a legislator being so straightforward. Steve Goddard asked, do we need another CDC session next week? I think we probably need at least a week to get over this one. So perhaps we'll do something on what's happening with investment next week. But who knows if both aren't. It's been a fantastic session, Derek. Thanks so much for you. And thanks to everyone for being here, asking great questions. I don't know if you want to wrap up with anything, Derek.
Noting that Julian is on the line, Julian Barker, I hope he forgives me for being ratty about legislation, but so long as
I'm
Julian...
used to you being ratty.
I don't think it's anything Julian hasn't heard.
I don't think you've said anything that I haven't heard from you before. So
good,
okay.
Good. Well, so long as we all appreciate each other and continue to work together for the good of the worker in the private sector, notwithstanding, of course, nothing in life is perfect. Let's just get on with trying to do what we need to do.
We can't be nasty to our most resilient of civil servants, a man who's been on the job for many a year, and we love you very much, Julian. I hope we can get this bloody stuff out sooner rather than later, so we can get on with doing some work around.
It's definitely coming out, definitely.
Okay, well, look, it's been marvellous. Thanks very much to everyone. I'm going to shut things up unless anyone wants to say anything. No? Okay, well, thank you very much. I'll say goodbye.
Thank you. Thanks all. Thank you, Derek. Brilliant session.
Thanks, everybody.
Pray for the East and pray for
Take
the
care.
West and pray for everywhere else. Peace. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks, Henry.
Bye.